for the Prime Minister and the government he leads, not for me and the House authorities. Right, let us get underway, Prime Minister. Shelley's for her. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Mr. Shelley's for her.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During this pandemic, in my constituency of North West Cambridgeshire, I have seen a number of instances of ordinary citizens doing extraordinary work, helping the elderly and the vulnerable. And that has been repeated across the country in every single constituency, giving true meaning to the words community spirit. Would my right honourable friend take this opportunity not only to acknowledge this fantastic work that has been done by so many people, but also to give a huge thank you to each and every one of these unsung heroes of our country.
I thoroughly concur with my right honourable friend, and I congratulate all the volunteers for the spirit and the achievements that they have delivered for the people of this country. And I was delighted that we had a first chance to honour them in the birthday honours list at the weekend, or just some of them.
Let's come to the Leader of the Opposition, Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 11th of May, the Prime Minister said that the government's COVID strategy, and I quote him, will be governed entirely by the science. On the 21st of September, the government's own scientific advisers, SAGE, gave very clear advice. They said a package of interventions, including a circuit breaker, will be needed to prevent an exponential rise in cases. Why did the Prime Minister reject that advice and abandon the science?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we will do whatever it takes to fight this virus and to defeat it. But since he quotes the SAGE advice, I might just remind him that on page 1 it says that all the interventions considered have associated costs in terms of health and well-being, and that policymakers will need to consider analysis of economic impacts and the associated harms alongside this epidemiological assessment. And the advice that I have today, Mr. Speaker, is that if we do the regional approach that commended itself to the House and indeed to the right honourable gentleman on Monday, Mr. Speaker, we can bring down the R and we can bring down the virus. So will he stick to his position of Monday and support that approach?
Keir Starmer.
I don't think that approach goes far enough, and neither does SAGE. And the Prime Minister talks of the costs. Since he rejected SAGE's advice on the 21st of September, I remind him, the R rate has gone up, the infection rate has quadrupled, hospital admissions have gone from 275 a day to 628 a day in England. Yesterday, 441 COVID patients were on ventilators, and the number of deaths recorded was tragically the highest since June the 10th. That's the cost of rejecting the advice. SAGE has a clear view on why that's happening. What's the Prime Minister's view on why these numbers are all heading in the wrong direction?
Mr. Speaker, I set that out very clearly in the House on Monday, and the difference between this stage of the pandemic and March and April, as the House knows very well, is that the disease is appearing much more strongly in some parts of the country than in others. And in Liverpool, for instance, alas, the figures are now running at 670 cases per 100,000 against 33 cases per 100,000 in Cornwall. 540 cases per 100,000 in Newcastle, alas, against 32 in Norfolk. And that is why the tiered approach, the three-tiered approach that we set out on Monday and that he then supported, is the right way forward. And we want to put in the most stringent measures necessary in the places where the virus is surging in order to get it down where it is surging, Mr. Speaker. That is the logical thing to do. So will he get on to his Labour friends in those parts of the north of England where we want to work with them to put those very stringent measures in place in order to deliver the reductions that the whole country wants to see? Will he support support those measures because he wouldn't support them last night, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I think the Prime Minister's behind the curve again. He probably hasn't noticed that this morning the council leaders in Greater Manchester that he's just quoted, including the Mayor and including the Conservative leader of Bolton Council, have said in a press statement that they support a circuit break above Tier 3 restrictions. Keep up, Prime Minister. The big problem the Prime Minister has, and it's from the Sage minutes that make it absolutely clear that his two main policies, track and trace and local restrictions, simply haven't worked. And we can't stand by. In June, the Prime Minister told me that track and trace would play a vital part in ensuring that we do not have a second spike this winter. His words. 3 months later, Sage have concluded that track and trace, their words, is only having a marginal impact on transmission. They go on to say, and this is the really worrying part, that this is likely to further decline in the future. Further decline. So let's not have the usual nonsense that anyone asking the Prime Minister a question about track and trace is somehow knocking the NHS. This is Sage's assessment, the government's own advisers. So after £12 billion, let's have a straight answer. Why does the Prime Minister think that his track and trace system has gone so wrong?
Mr. Speaker, it's thanks to NHS Test and Trace that is now testing more people than any other country in Europe that we know where the disease is surging, and we know that it is regionally distributed rather than nationally distributed at the moment, and that gives us a chance now to do the right thing. He wants to close pubs, he wants to close bars, he wants to close businesses in areas across the country where the incidence is low, and that's what he wants to do, and he wants to do it now, and yet he voted to do nothing last night, nothing in the areas where the incidence is highest, Mr. Speaker. He says one thing at 5 o'clock about calling for a national lockdown. When it came to a vote in this House of Commons, Mr. Speaker, to impose more stringent measures, he failed even to turn up.
Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I know that for someone who's been an opportunist all his life, this is difficult to understand. But having read and considered the Sage advice, I have genuinely concluded that a circuit break is in the national interest. Genuinely concluded. Mr. Speaker, it's the failure of the Prime Minister's strategy that means tougher measures are now unavoidable. That's Sage's view. Sage has advised that a circuit breaker should act to reduce R below 1, should reset the incidence of disease to a lower level, and should set the epidemic back by approximately 28 days or more. All three are vital, and that's why Labour backs it. So can the Prime Minister tell us what is his alternative plan to get R below 1? R below 1.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the plan is the plan that the right honourable gentleman supported on Monday. And the whole point, Mr. Speaker, is to seize this moment now to avoid the misery of another national lockdown into which he wants to go headlong by delivering a regional solution. And, Mr. Speaker, opportunism is, I'm afraid, the name of the game for the party opposite, because they backed the rule of 6, or he backed the rule of 6, and then refused to vote for it. I think at 3 o'clock, Mr. Speaker, the Shadow Health spokesman said that a national lockdown would be disastrous. At 5 o'clock, he was calling for it, Mr. Speaker. Let's go back to the approach that he was supporting on Monday. Let's try to avoid the misery of another national lockdown, which he would want to impose, as I say, in a headlong way. And let's work together. Let's work together, as he was prepared to do on Monday, to keep kids in school, who he would now yank out of school in a peremptory way, keep our economy going, and keep jobs and livelihoods supported in this country, Mr. Speaker, and let's take the commonsensical regional approach, and will he kindly spell out to all his colleagues across the whole of the country that that is the best way forward, as indeed he did on Monday.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, following the advice is now apparently opportunistic. Presumably he'll say the same to the leader of Bolton Council, a Conservative leader, who this morning said he supports a circuit break. Mr. Speaker, I've just listened to what the Prime Minister said about his strategy to get R below 1. But I can't think of a single scientist who backs him. He will know that the Chief Medical Officer said on Monday that his words, Chief Medical Officer, not confident, nor is anyone confident, that the Tier 3 proposals for the highest rate would be enough. That's Tier 3. That's Tier 3, the highest tier. So why is the Prime Minister so confident that his approach will get the R rate below 1? So confident? Or is that no longer the government plan?
I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, he is misrepresenting the position. Doubtless inadvertently, what our advice is that if the regional measures at Tier 3 at all levels were implemented in full, with the support and the active cooperation of local leaders, as indeed we have seen from the leader of Liverpool City Region, and I pay tribute to him and I thank him for what he is doing. If we saw full and proper enforcement, if they were able to conduct proper local test and trace with the support of the £500 million that we're giving, then yes, those measures would deliver, Mr. Speaker, the reduction in the R locally, regionally that we need in order to avert what none of us want to see, except now the Right Honourable Gentleman having performed this extraordinary U-turn, none of us want to see, and that is the disaster, the words of the Shadow Health spokesman, of a national lockdown. We don't want to go there. We want the regional approach. He should cooperate with it.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I've supported the government in all their measures so far, and I've taken criticism of it. But I think this measure is wrong, and a circuit breaker is in the national interest. I've read the advice of SAGE, and the government has rejected it. Mr. Speaker, this is my last question, and I'm sure the Prime Minister has his pre-prepared rant ready as usual. But we're at a tipping point. Time is running out. Maybe he can seize the moment and answer a question. This morning, the Telegraph quotes senior government sources saying the chances of the Prime Minister backing a circuit break in the next 2 weeks are about 80%. Is that right? And if it is, why doesn't he do it now, save lives, fix testing and protect the NHS?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this is a right honourable gentleman who claims to be supporting the government one day and then performs a dramatic U-turn the next. Everybody, Mr. Speaker, he claims to support the rule of 6 one day, then pulls his support the next. He wants tough measures and then refuses to vote for them. Everybody, Mr. Speaker, can see what he's doing. Labour have said it themselves. They see this, Mr. Speaker, as a good crisis for the Labour Party and one they wish to exploit. We see this as a national crisis that we are going to turn around. And the way we're going to do it, Mr. Speaker, and I rule out nothing, of course, in combating the virus. But we are going to do it with the local, the regional approach that can drive down and will drive down the virus if it is properly implemented. And that is what I believe he should be supporting. He said he'd support it on Monday, Mr. Speaker. This is our opportunity to keep things going, to keep our kids in school, to keep our businesses going. That, I think, is what the people of this country want to do. This is our opportunity to do that and to suppress the virus where it is surging. He refuses to accept that approach today. I hope that not for the first time, Mr. Speaker, he will change his mind and think the better of his actions.